whoever you teach, if you're an experienced English teacher, if you are a beginner, if you're somewhere in between, welcome to another American TESOL Institute webinar. I have the honor and privilege to host these monthly. My name is Jason R. Levine. I'm better known as Fluent CMC. And today our topic is teaching business English. Thanks so much for being here live. Thanks if you're watching this asynchronously. Let me just, 1 second, mute that. Okay. So teaching business English, I was going to do like a long list of tips. And once I started thinking about it, I changed my mind and dividing this into three areas, or three tips, but these three tips, we're going to expand on them. But I basically like how I could break it down into three, and I hope you'll agree with me. So number one, as with any course, start with a needs analysis, but let's talk about what that means specifically for business students. I mean, a needs analysis for a group of English learners where there isn't such a specific focus and goal is a little blurrier. But when you're doing a needs analysis for business English, I think it's a lot easier to imagine and prepare and create and execute with students. There are different ways to do it. So let's take a look at those ways. You could start with, if you have the opportunity to get information from students before they arrive. And let me just, before we go any further, explain that I know when I'm doing this, I need to consider the fact that some of you are teaching places where you have a textbook, you have a syllabus, a curriculum you have to follow, or maybe there's a suggestion of those things to follow, or maybe you have nothing at all. Maybe you're teaching privately. There's so many scenarios. So I'm going to try to, as I go along, take all of that into consideration. If you have specific questions and needs, you can always get in touch with me. I'll mention my email several times. I'll start now. support@fluentcmc.com. So just remember Fluent CMC, you can see it here. And I work with American TESOL Institute. So anybody who's watching this, connected with the Institute, I'm very happy to correspond with and get more specific about things if necessary. So back to what I was saying. So imagine you're somewhere where you have there is a way for you to get information about the students beforehand. What kind of questionnaire could you make? You could look online for them. You could use a large language model like ChatGPT. You could make it yourself. But basically, what are the students expecting? What do they need? And if they do it in English and you give them space to respond, to certain questions, you can already see their English level and maybe errors they're making. Even better, or along with this, you could meet with students one-on-one beforehand to find out what they expect from the course, what they want from the course, what they need to do after the course or currently in a job where they need business English. Once you're in the classroom, the needs analysis becomes really important because you're also seeing how the students are working together. And if you don't have the opportunity to do a post questionnaire on a one-on-one interview, you can start with this, right? Getting students together, and they could have questions and they can make write their own ideas by brainstorming. Again, why are they there? What do they need to do? And they're business students, so meeting each other and trying to and talking about their needs in their jobs. This is great. This is a big advantage over a group which has maybe very different needs and different situations, which can be cool too, but it is less challenging in a good way, a more focused way, when you have people that are in a similar have a similar purpose with English, and you're preparing them for the English they need for that purpose. And then that could lead into role plays right? And the good thing about role play, well, let's go back to group discussion. Even group discussion is you're starting to get an idea by circulating and seeing what they have to say, their English level, their pronunciation, their personalities, and that's part of needs. And obviously the needs like, oh, they need to be able to give presentations, or increasingly more important than that, I think, group discussions, meetings are a big one. But you can also get a sense of who they are on their English level. But you could also have them in role plays already. I mean, after this, I wouldn't suggest a role play right away, where you, from the needs, you figure out their interests and what they want in a role play situation like that, so you can really see what's missing, what's the functional language they're missing. That's coming up. That's the big one. Issues with pronunciation or grammar, etc. Self-assessment grid is sort of like the questionnaire idea, but more like during class, and that could be an activity where they, check off things about what they need and who they are, and etc., and then can discuss. So a lot of these things, you can see how they could work together. You could bring in even the pre-course questionnaires and use them as part of group discussion, brainstorming. The self-assessment grid could lead to the group discussion. I think that's often a good way, like have them on their own. Think of, highlight things that are important to them and then report it in their group. And then groups can report to other groups. So those are just some ideas. Needs analysis, you've got to start with this no matter what. And this is also where you build rapport. Now, I say you've got to, you do whatever you want, but let me rephrase that. In my experience, and it's a lot of experience I have doing this, if you start with it, you're also not only gathering information that will inform you how you're going to go forward, but you're also building a relationship or rapport with students. And when they see that you're really trying to figure out what they need, and this is easier, obviously, if you have a small group, but even a big group, then you're going to definitely want to rely more on things like the assessment grid and questionnaires and things, probably, in addition to getting them in groups. So you can really come away with a lot of great information and look at what's similar and what's different that they need, and then come back with a plan. But it's great when students can see that you're really interested in that, and that's what you're going to do. And even if you have a very prescriptive syllabus, like you have to use this book and you have to use this lesson plan on this day and so forth, you need to do this. Maybe it's even more important to do this, so that as you go through something that's sort of laid out for you, you're able to make sure that you can target things that your students need specifically. And that's really hard to do in a general English course, but not really here. So even if you have a book, right? If the book is any kind of business English book, is going to have some focus on situations, right? Like a meeting, a presentation, a phone call. So if you're gathering information on them, this will help you make that book the lessons around that book more meaningful, more interesting, and more personalized. Number two, I said they're just three. That one, first one's pretty fast. This one and the last one are going to take the rest of the time we have today. So you've done the needs analysis. Create a syllabus grounded in functional language. So let's look at these words individually. So syllabus, as I said before, maybe you don't have the liberty of creating a syllabus. Maybe that's good because you're not at the stage as a teacher with the experience. You feel you need to create a syllabus, or you don't have the time, or whatever it is. So maybe you have one, and maybe it's good, maybe it's not good, but either way, you can adapt it, and you're going to want to adapt it after the needs analysis for sure. Functional language. Now, maybe let's imagine you have a syllabus and it's more grammar may not match with your needs analysis, or maybe the syllabus doesn't include certain situations that your students really need, or the book doesn't, right? So all of that you can adapt. What I'm saying about functional language is that if you think, okay, grammar uh, gets taught along the way with language that's needed for a situation. If you think, well, pronunciation, we can work on that along the way. I strongly believe in that. So I'll explain what I mean in a moment about functional language, but basically it's about situations first and the language you need to succeed in those situations. And yes, that involves grammar. Yes, that involves pronunciation. But if you base the syllabus this way, you are not going to stop and just look at, okay, what is the present perfect? Even if it's when do you use present perfect in business English, I don't think that's as good as present perfect comes up when you're focusing on a certain function in a situation. So let me explain. What do? You first figure out from your needs analysis, and as you go along, what are the business situations that are most important for your students? If they're at one company, I don't know, human resources, it's very specific, then great. More likely, unless you're teaching privately, you're not going to have a group that has the same situations. They're going to need different ones. And again, you have to think about what that means in terms of your syllabus and your book. If they really want to focus on speaking in meetings, and your syllabus and book focuses more on presentation skills, they're really different, right? When you practice something to stand up and say, as opposed to the language for, interrupting and trying to take control in a conversation and this sort of thing. So, but you identify what these are. And if you have a book, maybe it's a book where you have functional phrases that are really good for that situation. So you're going to do meetings, business meetings. You have a book that has that and has some really good language that the students need for business meetings, or maybe not. So either way, as long as you are aware that this is so important, you look for it in your book, you look for it in the syllabus. If it's not there, then it's kind of on you, but it's so easy to do that these days with the internet, with large language models like ChatGPT, to bring in the functional phrases that are most important for your students to learn. And then, if you've got that, you start planning lessons about how to apply this language in real world, as opposed to a grammar-based syllabus, right? So we're going to look at that, and then how do you practice? So practice in class and practice out of class are very, very important, I believe. We're going to talk about the difference, more controlled practice and freer practice, practice where they have more of a script, more of something they don't have to try to come up with themselves, or if it's something they wrote, you help them correct it so they can really focus on the accuracy of it, as opposed to more improvisational moments where they're doing freer practice. So what connects all of that, again, is this idea of the situation, the functional English they need for the situation, and usually, right, a role play or a simulation, putting for any English learning, it's great, but for business English, it's particularly important because we can really focus in on moments that they have in their lives, whether it's right now or they're preparing to do it to start a job or work in a sector of a company where they're going to need to communicate more in English. So let's look at these. So just back to this slide, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to now look first at identifying the key business situations. So these could be already in your textbook or syllabus. They could be that you gather them from the needs analysis that we were talking about earlier. I chose these because they are, so common, so frequently needed. So this is what I mean by the situations. And then from the situation, you can think of functional phrases. Again, a good business English textbook will be, in my opinion, will be based on this. And you might already have it. You might have, let's say, for phone calls and video conferences, some functional language, but it's not that natural. So that's where you come in, and with help from resources on the internet, and especially from large language models. I'm going to keep talking about them. I'll probably just call them language models instead of ChatGPT or large language models from now on. But a language model, what's so amazing about it is how authentic the language is. So how accurate is the information, the facts? Is there, fake news? All of that is irrelevant for this purpose. If you ask a language model, could you please suggest, functional phrases that are important for phone calls or emails or negotiations, you're going to get good stuff, right? So if you notice that it's better than the book, then provide it to your students, right? Provide it in whether you're, in you have some kind of like teams, you have some kind of place where students are getting things, or you're handing things out, you create your own handouts, however you do it. And we'll talk about what they're going to do with these phrases in a moment. But first, you need to identify what they are. So one thing I did not do here, and I should have, you're going to see it in some other slides, is to put the stress. So could you repeat that, please? All right. I'm calling to follow up on. So drilling students with the pronunciation of these as they look at them is so important, because just their knowing it is not going to be the same as being able to understand it and have people understand them. But that comes with a lot of repetition that you're not going to do in class. That's the out of class practice we'll get to, but certainly you would want to model it. Or if you don't feel comfortable modeling it, finding other ways to model it, videos, podcasts, even the book. If the book has if it's a good book, and it has good functional phrases, and there are recordings, conversations, different things with the language in it, and it's not boring, and you feel it's authentic, it could be that way. So I'm not going to read through all these. I'm assuming you're looking at this while I'm talking, or you'll look at it later, but these are just a few examples. So once you've got your situations, you've got your functional language that connect to those situations, then what are the lessons going to be? So if you have lessons set up and you can't change them, or maybe you can just adapt them, okay. If not, let's imagine you've, from your needs analysis, you understand that there need situations where they're emailing, they're meeting, they're giving presentations. You've got the functional language. Well, this could be, week 1, for example, emails, week 2, meetings and discussions, week 3, presentations, right? I didn't write that here, but that's kind of what I have in mind for make lessons, right? And if the students see that, also it's going to motivate them, as opposed to, the next lesson is, part, present real conditionals versus, unreal conditionals or something. No, the conditionals will come up, right? Even before, let's go back for a moment and look, could you repeat that, please? Right? We already have modal verbs, right? For requests, like could you, right? So we've got the grammar coming in. I'm calling, that's present continuous, right? And if you need to stop and talk about grammar, or students have questions, you do it. This is, again, just my opinion from my experience, right? When we have the noun time, a time to do something, let's schedule a time to discuss this, a time to meet later. But do you need to talk about, a noun plus infinitive or something like that? So I think the best way for grammar to be acquired is when it's in comprehensible input that's functional. But again, you may have a syllabus, a book that stops and focuses on grammar. If you think that's helping your students, good. If you're concerned that maybe that's taking away from, let's go here to the real world application. That's something to consider because, really important things about grammar, like being accurate, being able to advance with grammar structures, these things can happen by focusing on functions rather than focusing on the grammar itself and pronunciation similarly. So here's the last one, role plays and simulations. So what do you do if your lesson is about, you know, phone calls? How about a difficult customer call? If you've got students in that situation, if you don't, you adapt, right? Well, what situation do they need to use, have phone calls? And if it's different, you can have people in different groups. Knowing what their needs are is just hugely important, again, for the rapport, the planning, and the execution. It will just make things so much easier than if you're trying to take, a book or a syllabus and just kind of, make everybody follow it. So even though it may seem like when you do a needs analysis, it means you're doing extra work, it's really the opposite in the end, because you'll know your students better and be able to, in the classroom, group them. Okay, you guys, how about a role play on, okay, if you're going to work at a call center and you need to help people, with issues with IT, you guys, here's an example of a role play like that, or you guys come up with language, from the functional language I'm giving you, and maybe your own ideas with the dialogue. And this is where it's also important to consider, controlled practice with more scripts versus freer practice. I certainly would start with scripts, so it can be role plays, dialogues that you generate with a large language model you find online from the book. It could be things that they generate and you help correct to make sure that they're never practicing with something incorrect. Again, marking the stress, something I did not do here. I understand your frustration. I almost always do that when I prepare things like this. So we will see it later, but I would definitely mark the script of the stress every time. By the way, here's another moment where I'll give you my email address. I will do that on these because it's so important, and then make a PDF. So if you want a PDF of the presentation, I always offer that. When we do these webinars with American TESOL Institute, I will mark the pronunciation, the word stress and sentence stress. And when you get the PDF, it will be there. So if they create something, I would help them mark the stress. And if you're not sure where to mark it, you can also ask large language model again. It's the best for that I found. So once again, I'm assuming you're looking at these. The functions are on the right? Expressing empathy, asking for clarification. And students, if their level is high, they may have their own that they know already or they're using. And it may just be that there's something not totally accurate. The preposition is wrong, or when they pronounce it, it's not great. But if it's something they already kind of know, you can help kind of fine tune it, as opposed to having them learn something brand new. So if they're very inexperienced with the language like this, then they're going to want the most common expressions. You can, simplify them a bit. We haven't talked so much about English level so far in this webinar, but, if you think, would you mind explaining this issue in more detail? You could say, could you explain the issue, as opposed to would you mind explaining? If you think could you explain is easier for your students. Okay, so moving on. How do you set it up? So you've got the language for it, and then, right, you could have a group of 2, 3, 4, 5. The way I had this one in my mind was having a third student. I like this, listening, taking notes. Maybe that person is going to be designing the next one or this kind of thing. I think that's great. I think feedback from students, especially if you're in a big group, you should be, I think, circulating and providing the feedback. But really good if a student does it and then they discuss it together. So the first two students are just doing it and the other person is watching, and you can change the rules. Um, and yeah, this is about a complaint, but whatever it is that you feel you want to do a role play on or a simulation on, it's just great. And it's just students can come to class expecting to do this and do practice outside of class, which is what's coming up next. Because obviously, to succeed here, they're going to need, and to feel comfortable with it, they're going to need to have some of this target language up here, or else it's not going to work. I included this because it's really nice to, if they have time to do homework or you want to do something in class, connecting one part of a business situation with another. So I think in almost every situation, you can do a kind of follow-up task. So there's an example here, but after a meeting, so if you simulate a meeting, discussion about a certain topic, it could be, summarizing the meeting, or it could be, okay, put an action plan together based on the meeting, what's going to happen. And then you're in another role play, a simulation, so they can follow up. And it could be for class, it could be for homework, or a combination of both. Okay, so to me, this is the biggest one. It's the third one of the biggest one. Let me explain what I mean. And I already alluded to it a few moments ago. So, in my experience, even if a book is not so great that you're using, you have no choice. That's the book. Even if the syllabus, you're not crazy about it and you don't have a lot of wiggle room to adapt it. Uh, Even if that is the case, if your students outside of the classroom are doing things that are motivating, that's what I mean by hooked. May not be total, full intrinsic motivation, meaning it may not be something you find that's just so much fun for them, and along the way they're getting functional language for business, but it can happen, and that's the best. Even if you, what I said, like about the not great book, not great syllabus, if they have more of this target language in their heads when they come into class, then they're going to get a lot out of it. So the flip side of that is the really critical thing. Imagine they have a great book, a great syllabus, or you planned some amazing activities with them. But out of the classroom, they're not getting practice with the functional language to be able to remember it. Probably not going to work very well. Now, if you have a lot of hours with them, and they're able to, use scripts and kind of do enough repetition, and by practice I mean repetition, not application. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Then maybe it can work. But in most situations with a business English class, you're going to have them, a limited number of hours. Or if it's a private student, maybe you meet once or twice a week. What happens out of class? Are they getting enough meaningful practice, which means enjoyable and contextualized practice? So let me explain what I mean. First of all, you know, if you have created or you have a textbook syllabus with really great ways to apply and analyze with business English, that's only going to work with a foundation of language. And if you see the little arrow here, that's repetition. So what I'm thinking about here is repetition with functional language. That is the very, very narrow focus we have right now. Repetition with idioms is also important. And I have a kind of cool example with that, but especially getting the functional language up here, that requires repetition. So meaningful repetition, I just mentioned something, meaning that you like doing it. It's not just rote learning and repeating just phrases like a list. if you remember some of those expressions, those we had earlier, those functional language phrases, a list of them, just repeat them. Okay, that's insane, right? But even like repeat this dialogue. Why do we usually repeat dialogues? So this is what we need to consider. What is natural repetition? So the word meaningful to me, includes natural, includes, enjoyable, includes, connected to my life and what I want to do with English. Spaced repetition, if you don't know what that means, imagine an app like Duolingo, which is based on spaced repetition, meaning that you get exposure to language at different intervals. Right? So if it's flashcards, that's the easiest example, right? You get a bunch of flashcards, and the app is giving you the flashcards at different intervals depending on your ability to remember them. So spaced repetition is so important, but it's often connected to activities that are not necessarily interesting or fun. So meaningful spaced repetition through immersive reading. What is immersive reading? People often assume immersive reading means, reading, throwing yourself into reading, or, reading across, a number of weeks or months or something like that. But immersive reading means reading while you listen. So reading something and listening at the same time. So to me, this is the magical combination. Out of class practice, doing meaningful spaced repetition through immersive reading. So to make that even easier, right, reading and listening to functional language at intervals. Now, the intervals part is great for business English students overall, generally, I think, because it's they have like moments, right, in their lives. So when they can do things as opposed to, and we're all, I think, at the point where nobody's going to sit down and have, this many hours to practice. Well, that's okay, because it's actually better. You learn better if you do frequent interval-based practice. So that could be, between meetings, that could be at a certain time after dinner when, the kids are in bed or whatever. So that's about the intervals. And there are certain activities that are more natural to do at intervals also. So we need to think about those. Watching a short video is something we do naturally at an interval. Listening to a song is something we do naturally at an interval. As opposed to, reading a dialogue. It's not something we necessarily do naturally. So reading and listening at the same time. Why is that so important? So if you're an experienced teacher or language learner, you may already know what I'm going to say. But if you're not, this is really, really important. So English especially, what we see on the printed page and what we hear is often, right, there's a lot of disconnect there, right? So the sound spelling relationship in English is a little wacky, right? So, a word like though or through that's spelled the same but sounds different, when you are reading and listening at the same time, you don't have to consciously teach them phonics as much as they are getting that relationship is happening naturally. So they're recognizing what the word looks like and what the word sounds like. So maybe start thinking right now while I'm talking, what are some natural things we do while we read and listen at the same time? Because that's doing that outside of class and inside of class too. But remember, the difference is practice means repetition. Repetition in the classroom, this is the time where you're doing communicative activities. You don't have enough time for repetition with functional language. And also, that's not, we're looking for meaningful practice outside, but even in the classroom, meaningful practice, I think, is meaningful, role plays, meaningful, the next step of practice, which is more, acting it out, more application in a, comfortable, secure setting. Let me keep going, because even though I'm trying to give you examples, maybe this still seems too theoretical. So here's my list of out-of-class practice focusing on immersive reading. Now, doing worksheets, if you know me, you might be really surprised I put this here, because most of what I do, making games and songs, is because worksheets don't really work as well. I mean, where's the immersive reading? First of all, you're not hearing anything from it. And worksheets compared to other activities usually are not as meaningful. But there is an exception I'm going to show you. And there are a few exceptions, but I'm focused on one for business English that I really like. Playing games. You can play a game in class, but I'm talking about what they can do outside of class with games. And I have one example, but there are many, many examples now. And I'm working on what I hope is the best game ever for this, fluency cards, where the students will be able to play card games with functional language, with many things. But for this example of, business English functional language, where they're getting immersive reading through the game, they're hearing the language, they're seeing it. So I want to mention that, and I'll mention it again in a moment. Shadowing and recording. This is amazing with immersive reading. So I want to explain what I mean with that. Chatting with large language models, especially now that not with the free ones usually, but starting to. You can also listen, practice your listening skills, not just texting. And then how to use scripts outside of class as a thing that can motivate them to use in class. And then finally, rhyming with couplets. So those of you who know, I make songs to practice English, and I have business English songs, by the way. So I'll show you that. But this I want to focus on because it's something you can do and the students can do without relying on other people's songs, and more appropriate for people who are, adults doing British English. So worksheets. There are so many bad, boring worksheets that don't focus on functional language. But these, TEFL-tastic, this has been around for a long time. It's all free. There's such great stuff here, both for out of class and in class. So for in-class activities, role plays, all the things we're talking about already, amazing stuff. But also things students can do at home, worksheets to do at home. Isn't really immersive reading unless you record certain things or get them to record themselves, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But anyway, I had to put in worksheets because TEFL-tastic is so great for business English stuff. There's just so much here. Some of it might seem a little outdated, but you can also tweak it. It's all free, which is great because there are many places on the web now with really great business English stuff, but there's a paywall and you may not want to do that. So definitely check out the stuff at TEFL-tastic. With games, I mentioned mine game, and I'll mention it again, fluency cards. I didn't bring any slides for it. It's not quite ready, especially not for business English, but I'm going to have TOEIC games. I'm going to have games for, those different situations. We talk about meetings, emails, presentations, so that students out of class can play against the computer and play against themselves with those high frequency functional phrases. So fluency cards, keep on a lookout for those. In the meantime, there's Bamboozle. You can join for free. You can follow me. I want to show you something, and I'm friends with the guy who started this company and continues to run it. Really, really great guy. So in a way, I am promoting it, but I'm not getting anything directly from promoting it. But if you see class pin, if you create, if you have a paid account, it's not expensive, and maybe your school can pay for it, or I don't know. But the class pin is if you have a game and you give the class pin to your students, they can play out of class. Now, they can also just go join for free and play certain things. But if you create games at the paid level, and you can really customize and make some amazing games, then and give them the class pin, they can play it. So this is just a screenshot. It doesn't really have my business English things on here. But anyway, this is just to show you, you can follow me on Bamboozle for free. And you'll see games of mine with business English. You can also just search Fluent CMC, business English, TOEIC, lots of TOEIC games. And I will be doing a presentation on standardized tests for business English at some point soon. So that, well, I'm not talking about that today, but if you have TOEIC students or lingual skills students or other tests, business tests they're preparing for, I've got a lot of great stuff. If you can't find the stuff you want here, also email again FluentCMC, sorry, support at fluentcmc.com, and I'd be happy to direct you to certain games they can play. But what's really, really great about Bamboozle is that the students can play at home and can play the games. They can also just use flashcards. So it's very self-explanatory, but if you need my help with this, then just send me an email. And you can also create your own games and look for games online. Take functional phrases and put them on your own cards and play some kind of card game, or get ideas from a language model on games. Hey, I'm teaching functional phrases, give me an idea for a game. But let me keep going here to make sure that we touch on everything that I planned for this presentation. Shadowing and recording. So by shadowing, I mean you find a business English podcast that has functional language in it, a YouTuber. You find, I don't know, some funny business meeting sketch, that's kind of a joke or something. There's some really funny ones. But anyway, you're looking for things that have functional language in them, and you get students at home outside of class to watch the first time, understand it, make sure they understand what it is, and then after they do that, asking them to pause, repeat, try to pronounce it the way that they're hearing from the recording. I think is much, much better than a recording of a conversation from a textbook, although you can use that. You can do this with TOEIC conversations, although it's more motivating. I mean, if they're taking TOEIC, it can be motivating to do that, and that's for the other presentation. But finding things that are real, authentic materials, not having them shadow at first, but whether it's a video or a podcast or whatever it is, to do it first and enjoy it, learn from it, but then go to certain parts, play, repeat, pause with subtitles as for the immersive reading. I can't believe I didn't mention that. So that's the great thing here. Subtitles are getting better and better with AI. So it should always be reading and listening at the same time. Students think, well, but in a real business meeting, I don't have subtitles. Exactly, and that's why you practice with them and with scripts as much as possible, because if you think about it, you can ask your students this. Ask them to think about if they're in a business meeting in their first language. So if it's Spanish or Chinese or whatever it is, ask them, do they see words when people speak? Do they see the words? They'll probably say, oh, no. But then ask them, can they turn on the subtitles? Like if they want, could they turn them on? Could they see the words? And the answer is yes. Now, if they're in a business meeting in English, can they turn on the subtitles? Can they see? No, right? And that's normal. Or they can just see something. So they need to do a lot of immersive reading. Remember, that's listening and reading at the same time, because that will put the visuals in. The reading will help them, especially with accuracy and grammar, but also with, listening comprehension, if they can see the words. So that's hugely important. Recording is recording themselves. So after they've done it, can they, now record themselves saying those things without listening, or it could be listening with the headphones and then recording themselves, and then comparing the recordings with the real thing. That is so useful. You'll have students say, "Oh, I don't like my voice," et cetera, et cetera. But you get used to doing it. it's just amazing with phones now also how easy that is to do. And they will notice the progress as they go along. They'll like their voice more, they'll get used to it. This will build confidence, which obviously is huge here. And they will also notice themselves getting better and getting more accurate and sounding more natural. Large language models, Chat GPT. Why is it called that? Because you can chat. Chatting is amazing. And you can do a role play scenario. You can do all this stuff out of class. Arguably, even more important than the in-class one, because of how easy it is to do and how often they can do it outside. So we know the disadvantage of a large language model, the big disadvantage that it's not the best, most reliable source of information. It might be biased, et cetera, or you're worried about your data, or those things have nothing to do with how we can use it for language learning at practice, right? So you can always tweak it. It's the prompts. So, oh, it's too difficult. Okay, well, let's ask it to make it easier. Oh, you want to refine the prompt. You're practicing some scenario with it. You want to change directions. It can be so personalized. So here's an example plan that has worked well for me, where you start with the class. The class is having the chat. You're doing it together. You're not just saying, okay, use these prompts and go chat with a language model. So you start with a class chat. I'll show you what I mean. And then give students prompts, or maybe you don't even need to give them prompts. Maybe as adult business English students, they already from the class room idea have a sense, and you can let them go on their own. So if you want to see this in detail, I can give you the PDF, but this is basically, I'll talk and you can kind of look. My class did this together. This was not business English. These are students preparing to write essays and give presentations. They're engineering students, but it's very similar. So we did this together. It was so much fun. Sorry, this is actually middle school students. It was not what I just said. I have a bunch of these, but it doesn't really matter. Who are you? If you look down, about could you use more basic English? We are beginners, right? So I'm writing this while the students are contributing, and so JR is me, obviously, right? So I said, let's create a dialogue customer, right? So earlier, talking about the role plays and simulations in class, they can practice outside of class at first. And yeah, they could practice with a friend or a student. But what's so amazing about a language model is, again, adapting the level. The language is so high frequency, highly functional. You're never, if you have a role play, you're never going to, so if you look here, great, we have several options for iPhone 6 cases. Are you looking for something in particular? You're never going to have language that isn't, the most common, most functional, which is great. And students, when they start doing this and it feels so natural, it's like, wow, this is so easy. And now you can do this and actually have the language model respond with their voice. Again, usually it's paid, and we're not quite there with, I mean, they are there, but we don't have access to where it's going to be very soon, where it's just like, it sounds like you're talking to a person. So maybe some of you have access to that now. But even if your class, even if you're teaching somewhere where there's not a lot of money and resources, a free chat GPT on a phone or something similar, Claude or Gemini or whatever, this is just going to get easier and easier to do. And it's much more natural, isn't it, than, some kind of worksheet thing with a dialogue. This is interactive, and they can use that to prepare for the real thing in the classroom. So I did want to show you this. So the other great thing is here. Look at ChatGPT said, fire away with your questions, and I'll do my best. And I wrote, what does fire away mean? Oh, and then can you explain bumps and drops? So this is, remember, the classroom chat. You're modeling what students can do. So you can say, hey, don't forget to ask if you don't understand something. Explain it. It's a chat. And here I had to remind you, we are beginners. This was a while ago. ChatGPT 4 is actually, this is a couple of years ago, I think, or a year. It's so much better. You wouldn't get this as much, but at the time it was like I mentioned earlier, we are beginners, and it was okay for a minute, and then I kind of forgot. So it's better. It's better now than it was before. So you can give students prompts. I mean, if you're preparing to do a simulation in the classroom with, a business meeting, a negotiation between, two companies, you could give them the prompt and they can practice at home with that. And then they're going to get the functional language through that. That could also be in the game. That could also be, in a video. But large language models, wow. The advantages over the other things we're talking about are just huge. And you can help them write the prompts, or if they're ready to do it, they can do it. They can write them in their first language and translate them if it's too hard for them. Or part of the exercise could be also, improving their writing in English for prompts, which is, wow, can't think of a better way to think about how to improve writing, because you can give a prompt and then change it and make it better and get the language model to give feedback on it. Just endless, endless. So when I say practicing with scripts, you can do a nice segue with a large language model. Let's say the students are they're doing some kind of role play with ChatGPT, for example, and you could ask when they finish, generate a script based on what the conversation we just had, and those scripts could then be used in the classroom. And like an actor, immersive reading, you're getting the words in your head so that you can gradually shift away from the script and do it without. So I guess the most important thing about this one, because we don't have time to go into too much detail, is don't rush students to put away the script. It's like, don't rush them to not look at the lyrics of a song, right? As long as it feels good for them to have the script or the lyrics, have it be a natural moment, right? Where I don't need the lyrics anymore. The song's in my head. I don't need the script anymore. It's in my head. So yeah, scripts generated by language models, scripts that they make that you help them with, scripts. I'm doing something now with students preparing for debates, and all the debate language and the debates, they're starting just reading like actors. And then the next step is improvising, so that's especially good if you have low-level students, which I have. It's even more reason to start with a script and then get them to kind of add their own ideas. Last thing today, I think the timing's good because we have an hour together, and then you're welcome to ask questions if you're here live at the end. We'll stop it so we have a video that we can share out, but I'll leave time for questions at the end. I do a lot with songs, and before I get into this, explaining this activity you can do, you're welcome to, and I would love it if you looked at the songs I have that might work for business English. So I have some, and again, you can contact me if you can't find them. But a full song with a video could be great. But let me show you what's great about rhyming couplets. What do I mean? You start this way. Now, because we talked about functional language so much, I decided to do this. But imagine first it's functional language. It's, excuse me, could you repeat that, please? Or I see your point, but I don't totally agree, right? So it could be functional phrases. I have idioms here from business because we haven't talked about business idioms today. So imagine you have these business idioms that are very common in American English. They could be from the book. They could be things you came up with. It could be things you think your students would like, and maybe they started to come up with, and you said, well, we don't really say that. We say this. Anyway, I have a list. What do you do with the list? How do you get it in their head so they can use it naturally in a situation? So we talked about the dialogues. We've talked about shadowing, putting them in a game. But another thing you can do, and rhythm and rhyme will help them remember it, and I've had students really motivated to do this, is not create a whole song, but you just start grouping them either by, they relate to one another, or, there's some rhyming, you can see already here, right? Actually, I don't have the rhyming here yet. So here I'm just thinking, okay, these might go well together. And then I got to this. Now, there is a step in between, let me explain, but it's not as hard as you think. First of all, you're not writing a song. These four couplets are not related. So you could try to do that. That's a song where you have to then relate them, but much easier. Make something short, and it doesn't have to be with music. It doesn't have to be a rap or even, it can be, right? They use a rhyming dictionary, or all you need is really ground around air there, nutshell well, mission competition. As long as you have a rhyme at the end, and it doesn't have to be a perfect rhyme. It could be something just similar sounding, or maybe no rhyme at all. What's the most important thing? You've got something that looks like this. Let's get the ball rolling, get this project off the ground. We need to get down to business. Let's stop messing around. If you didn't rhyme it, it wouldn't be as good. And it's not that hard to rhyme it. But even more importantly, do you have something that students can repeat and remember? But yeah, let's go with rhyme. I said it's rhyming couplets. So it's not that hard to find one rhyme. And you can use a rhyming dictionary to do it as well. So this can be very, very cool, because if they want to do it music, they can listen to an instrumental and do, let's get the ball rolling and get this project off the ground, right? Like more of a rap or a song, let's get the ball rolling, right? But it can just be something they read and repeat. So you can record yourself doing it. You get a large language model to do it. They can record it. But the idea is hearing it, reading it, repeating it. And you can make these over and over and over again. And if they're motivated to do it, if you do it in a fun way, they will remember them, because it's not a long song. The rhyme at the end helps them remember. But again, have them reading it all the time, right? Not feeling like they have to remember, unless they get so good at it that they don't need it anymore. And then you know what will happen? It will pop out in a conversation, of course, after they understand what the idioms are, but the functional language, even more important, I think. So imagine what we talked about earlier, expressions they need for those functional the situations, and putting them into rhyming couplets. This brings us to not the end, but we're getting close of the American TESOL Institute's monthly webinar. I talk about this every time and apply it to what we've been discussing. So, studying English would be, studying how the grammar works, or even studying the meaning. What does, get the ball off the ground mean? What does this idiom mean? And that's important. Meaning is important. But using English, let's jump to that, right? Using English is in the real world, if they're in a meeting and they need to introduce their idea, interrupt somebody, that sort of thing. And practicing English, what we talked about today is really two types. One would be the in-class practice, but I wouldn't really call that practice personally as much as using English in a more controlled environment that's, not the real world. Because practicing to me is the repetition, right? Now, you might do some repetition in the classroom too. But as I mentioned, I think, most people don't have that kind of situation where you have hours and hours with students, where you can do kind of repetitive practice and also, more free activities. So if you're using Classroom for the activities, like a role play, it's the repetition, that practice, whether it's a game, whether it's, ChatGPT, whether it's the rhyming couplets, whether it's, shadowing with a podcast. That is so key, so that when they're using language, either in the classroom in an activity or the real world, they've got the functional phrases, especially, and idioms, not as important, but also important, that they need to succeed. And just back to this, we saw it's the repetition to remember, and then with that practice, the using, that's where you come in as their teacher. You're providing that in the classroom, and basically you're kind of mimicking those situations so that they're able to do the same thing outside the classroom. When students practice, when they get meaningful repetition, at short intervals, immersive reading, remember, then they get more accurate. And that accuracy makes them feel better. They're able to understand people in business situations. People can understand them. That's when they feel the confidence to then, improvise more, feel more relaxed. So that practice is so crucial in the formula for fluency. Practice makes what? Yes, you're right, but it also makes progress. I like practice makes perfect. If the perfection is motivating, I want to sound perfect, and it gets me going as a business English student to be perfect. But I don't like if it makes me feel like, oh, my English is so bad, I'm not perfect. I have to be perfect. We have to make mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. But the best one is, right, when you practice enough and you get things stuck in your head permanently. You've got them for that role play, for that real life situation. That's absolutely the best. Oh, sorry. Let me close out here because I thought I had another slide. Thanks so much, everybody. Those of you who are here live, I'll be with you in a second. But first, let me just thank everybody watching, whether you're here now or not. The American TESOL Institute, thank you so much for the opportunity to reach English language teachers around the world with these webinars. I love it so much. Yeah, thanks. Thanks to all of you. And have a great day, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. And yeah, see you next time for another American TESOL Institute webinar. Bye-bye, everybody. Peace, respect. Let's do that, boss.